In this course, we will talk about the relationship between language and society. We will see how language works in society and how society governs the use of language. There is a very strict and unique relationship between these two elements. Language is useful in society, it is meaningful in the society, however, it is one of the most sophisticated products of human mind. We will explore the relationship between language and society throughout this course. Today, we are going to be looking at the components that will be useful for us to understand in the beginning before we get into the details of the elements that we will be discussing in this course. The two things that are important for us to understand is language and society. Such a discussion falls in the larger discipline called linguistics. So, we will try to understand three terms: language, linguistics and society. Let us start first with linguistics. Linguistics is a larger discipline that deals with the study of language. In short, we can say everything that we study about language falls in the domain of linguistics. In this case, we are going to be looking at language and society. Such a connection, such a relationship falls within the larger domain of linguistics, and this is specifically called sociolinguistics. Look at language from its role in society is called sociolinguistics, whereas when we look at society from the perspective of language, such a thing is called sociology of language. We will be looking at sociology of language as well. We will not be making the narrow distinction between the two, which is micro and macro distinction, but we will be looking at both together. So, that is how we define linguistics, that is how we relate language and society and sociolinguistics. The next term is language. As we know, and has been established in various discussions and huge range of research, that language is a product of human mind. Language is special purpose cognition. Language is very different from all other activities that we do. It constructs humans. It is constitutive of humans. And also, language not only defines humans, but language in the particular context of what we are going to be discussing becomes or happens to be medium of construction and dissemination of any kind of knowledge. The role of language in human life, in society, is huge. It is an accepted phenomena, so much so that we understand and acknowledge that we cannot conceptualize humans, we cannot conceptualize society, or for that matter anything else without language. Such is the significance of language. When it is called the medium of construction of knowledge and dissemination of knowledge, it is imperative for us or for anyone to understand what language is about, how language works, and only then we can understand what we do with language. So, linguistics also deals with systematic study of language in a systematic fashion. It is studied at the level of sounds, words, sentences and discourse. These are four fundamentals of the study of language. These are four blocks of language. We study sounds, we study words, then we study sentences, and finally, when we get to discourse, that is the place where we can see the relationship between language and society. So, and we have discussed the significance of language. We have looked at the components of language in terms of sounds, words, sentences and discourse. It is also important for us to very briefly touch upon how is it that we learn language, and then we will understand language in little bit more details before getting into a discussion on its relationship with society. So, keep in mind so far that an understanding of what language is and what language does in the real world will follow to some extent from how we learn language. It is very significant to understand the point about language learning, particularly when language learning is natural, automatic for humans. We will try to understand this very briefly. It is a much larger discipline, it has been discussed in details, but let us see how we discuss it here. There are fundamental ideas and fundamental things that we need to put in front, and such things are, there is a hypothesis that all human children are born equipped with the capacity to learn language. This has led people to say language is a biological capacity, and this happens only in the case of human children. So, such a capacity is also called language acquisition device. This is a hypothetical entity which is assumed to be the language capacity for every human child. This device, this hypothetical device, has been argued to have, in simple term, blueprints of all the languages. That is, it has fundamentals of language at least in two parts. Together these two parts are called universal grammar. So, the blueprint or the fundamentals of language is what we know as universal grammar. Universal grammar will have two parts, principles and parameters. Principles are those elements which are common to all languages. That is, languages do not vary along the lines of these principles. In fact, languages are similar to one another along the lines of these principles, whereas languages vary from one another along the lines of parameters. To take an example, all the languages will have sentences. This is a principle. All the sentences must have verbs. This is also a principle. All the sentences must have a subject. This is also part of a principle. And this will not vary language to language. This is going to remain constant. However, what varies from language to language, and that is known as parameters, are the following. Some languages will have verbs in the middle of a sentence. These languages are called verb medial languages, namely English. When we say a sentence, John eats a pizza, the verb eat precedes the object, and therefore, it ends up being in the middle of a sentence, and therefore, this language is called a verb medial language. On the other hand, a language like Hindi, where we can say the same sentence as John pizza khata hai, the verb khata hai is the final constituent in the sentence, and such a language is called verb final language. So, according to the parameters of occurrence of verb in a sentence, there are three types of languages, and they are verb final languages like Hindi and many other languages. In fact, most of the languages is spoken in South Asian subcontinent. However, verb final languages are not restricted to South Asian subcontinent alone. English, German and many other European languages are verb medial languages. However, Arabic is verb initial language. So, these are three positions in which verbs could occur in natural languages, and that could be considered a parameter. There are hundreds of parameters along which languages vary. To give you one more example of a parameter is the following. In some languages, what we call prepositions precede nouns, whereas in some languages they follow the noun. For example, when we say on the table, the element on, which is a preposition in the language English, precedes the noun table, whereas table par in a language like Hindi, preposition, in this case a postposition par, follows the noun table. So, along the lines of these things, languages vary from one another. These are parts of universal grammar, and they are all inbuilt in language acquisition device, and that has been argued, and it has been argued that human children are born with this capacity. What happens is human children interact with their immediate society, that is the society where they are born, and the society for them constitute the people who interact with them. The language that people who interact with young children provides input, and on the basis of that limited, fuzzy, unclear input, children get triggered and the language acquisition device gets triggered, and the capacity which helps them develop the capacity to generate infinite number of grammatical and fully acceptable sentences. At the age of 4, human children become linguistically adult. So, the role of input that they receive from their immediate surroundings serves a critical role in learning of language. When what they receive from their immediate surroundings triggers what exists in human mind, that is language acquisition device, together develops the capacity to speak, the capacity to generate sentences, and then there are further details of this. So, in short, the society plays an important role in learning of language as well. It is highly unlikely that a child born in Chennai or New Delhi will be speaking a language like Spanish or French. However, what is normal is a child born in Chennai will be naturally speaking Tamil, and a child born in Delhi will be speaking the language of the surroundings where she is born. This is how, in short, we understand how we learn language. To define a language is one of the most complex things because of the nature of language. There are two parts in understanding language. One is the nature of language and the other is the structure of language. We have just discussed principles and parameters on the basis of the structure of language. The nature of language is equally important for us to understand. We will be looking at the nature of language in great details in its relationship with society shortly. why we say the nature of language is such that there are two terms which can help us define nature of language. The two terms are continuum and fluidity. In fact, we will see it in great details that language does not seem to be a countable entity. In fact, the nature of language is fluid, and that fluidity constitutes a continuum which helps us understand internal variations within the language. Therefore, when we say a language Hindi, and just with this much Hindi, it is not unfair to assume that everyone speaks Hindi the same way. However, that is not true. In fact, Hindi is spoken in lots of different ways, hundreds of different ways. Similarly, all other languages are spoken in many ways. That is because of internal variation. That is because the nature of the language is fluid, and each of these varieties becomes a point on continuum that helps us understand the nature of language. In short, the language has been defined in Routledge's Encyclopedia of Philosophy as one of the impressive and fascinating human capacity. It has also been termed as strikingly powerful and complex system. We just discussed the phenomena of language learning. The phenomena of language learning helps us understand what language is about. The complex system, it is called a complex system because it is highly structured and rule governed. It is powerful and complex both at the same time because we learn to speak language without knowing, without putting conscious efforts. Therefore, it is very simple to conclude that learning language is totally effortless, and here we mean learning language at a very early stage. We are talking about learning to speak first language. Therefore, the terms like human capacity and human languages being powerful and complex, these are important things to understand, and they follow from our understanding of how we learn language. We have talked about linguistics, we have talked about sounds, words, sentences and discourse. The fundamental ideas of sounds are studied in phonetics and phonology, words are studied in morphology, and sentences are studied in syntax. Meaning is studied in semantics. These are some of the fundamentals of understanding language. These subdisciplines of linguistics help us understand different details of language, different components of language. There are interfaces within them as well, but we leave them aside. Then we get to discourse, and that becomes the part of sociolinguistics where society comes in the play. Now, why we want to understand what linguistics is about in the context of our understanding of how we learn language and what language is about is following and simple. We want to emphasize that as much language is a phenomena of human mind, language is a social phenomena as well. The role of society in us learning language is vital. Primary input comes from society, and the society is the element that decides what we speak. The underlying system gets elaborated, gets clarified when we talk about universal grammar and principles and parameters. However, the rules of the use of language would come from society, and they happen, if not at a time, almost simultaneously, one after the other. Soon after, the rules of the language gets clarified in human mind. Therefore, it is important to understand that language, what we call language in society, is actually the language of discourse, the language that people speak. Human mind is concerned with the units of language, parts of language, but society deals with all of them together at the level of discourse. So, for the study of sentence, any individual sentence works. John eats a pizza. Delhi is a big city. Taj Mahal is beautiful, and Chennai is the capital of Tamil Nadu. All these constitute units and they are sentences. However, when we try to put them together, they do not generate discourse. They are random sentences. A constitution of discourse around something is what constitutes the use of language in society, and that is what we need to understand. And in this course, with these fundamental ideas of how we learn language, what the components of sentences and language are, and how we study them, we will need to understand how the two things work in society. Tomorrow, we will be looking at the relationship between language and society in more details, with the terms like language and dialects and how they work in society on continuum with fluidity. Thank you.